It'll give you that notification that says we are now recording. That's legally required by law, but since I love you all as brothers and sisters in Christ, it's also a courtesy that we want to extend to you in the name of being upfront, straightforward, and honest. Before I introduce to you tonight's host and topic, I do have to say you're used to Pastor Jeff Duncan serving as your host for this bi-weekly program. Pastor Jeff Duncan, For Life Live is only part of his full-time job with Lutherans for Life. He's also a mission and ministry director, which means that he works together with all of our affiliates, our frontline communities, our volunteers, pastors and congregations, helping them understand and brainstorm ways to put their gospel-motivated for-life convictions into practice. That is what he's doing this evening. He's meeting with a congregation, I believe, in the state of Nebraska to share with them some wonderful gospel-motivated resources as they continue their journey. That's why I get to fill in. I am Pastor Michael Solomink. I serve as Executive Director of Mission and Ministry here at Lutherans for Life. Have been doing so for about 6 years, and it is a privilege and a delight to be able to be host for the evening. Our agenda, in a moment, we're going to have an opening prayer, and then we're going to dive right into Pastor Johnson's presentation on the topic that you've come to learn about. At about 8 o'clock, that presentation is going to conclude, and we're going to have some extended time for questions and answers. If you have questions, please do post those as we go along in the chat feature of the video conferencing Zoom software. You'll find that usually at the bottom of the screen, there's a little speech bubble icon with chat. You can just press that and it'll pop that up for you. Related to that, I have included a couple of links already in the chat. If you don't see those right away when you open it up, just scroll up. One of those is to let you know that we do try to get most of these For Life Live episodes on our archive page. The link is listed there. So if you like this presentation and you want to learn more about other presentations on a variety of topics, they're free for you to view at your convenience at that link. Also, if you're interested in upcoming For Life Live episodes, we do have a calendar of those being planned for the future. That's just on our homepage, but I've included that link in the chat as well. You can click on there, and then on our homepage, you just scroll down to the calendar. For Life Live happens every other Tuesday. I guess that would be the first and third Tuesdays of the month. If there's a fifth Tuesday, I don't believe we have a For Life Live on that occasion. Finally, if you'd like to participate in our very next For Life Live episode in 2 weeks, October 19 at 7 p.m., the topic will be Isaiah's story, a short but meaningful voice for life. And I've included the link for you to click through and register in advance so that you can get the login credentials for that as you had for tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about that episode. It's going to be presented by Heidi. Oh my gosh. And with a name like Solomink, you would think that I don't butcher names, but I think it is Wugazer, or it could be Vugatzer, if we're speaking the father tongue of German. But Heidi's a baptized child of God, wife, a mother, proud Lutheran, a trained DCE, and a grief mentor. Heidi grew up in Kalamazoo, that's the state of Michigan. She attended Concordia University in St. Paul and currently resides with her husband and their children in Jacksonville, Florida. Heidi has served as DCE for 10 years in Jacksonville before she retired to be a full-time mom and homemaker. Her husband is from Iowa. That's God's country, as you will learn. Pastor Johnson also is from Iowa and serves in Iowa. That's where I grew up. And her husband, John, Heidi's husband, John, is a diehard Hawkeyes fan, which is true of everybody who lives in Iowa, except for the people who reside within about a half an hour of Ames. John's a software engineer. Their daughter, Lily, is 12 years old, 7th grade. Their son, Isaiah, about whom the story will be shared, was delivered stillborn in February of 2016 after 34 weeks of life in utero. He had a genetic condition called trisomy 18. that she'll talk extensively about. It causes heart defects, and in this case, prematurely ended his life. Through this trial, the Vugatzers have come to see God's hidden presence in suffering and his mercy in unexpected places. And I anticipate that that will be the substance of what she has to share there. Since Isaiah's death and the subsequent death of her brother-in-law by suicide just 1 year later, Heidi has become trained as a grief mentor. She works at the local crisis pregnancy center and also in her local church setting, managing grief ministry in various locations, especially caring for families who have suffered infant loss, pregnancy loss, and other loss as well. So in that workshop in 2 weeks, October 19 at 7 p.m., you can come hear about Isaiah's story, about God's faithful care for Isaiah and his family, also some resources that can benefit other people in the same situations, how God comes to us in the midst of pain and suffering, and how you can do more related to palliative care, grief ministry, trauma, and trisomy 18. So those links are all already for you in the chat. With that, I would like to ask you to join me in coming before the Lord in prayer as we begin our time together this evening. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, without any merit or worthiness on our part, you have given us our bodies and souls, reason and all our senses, our eyes, ears, and all our members, and you still take care of them. You have taught us through your Son, Jesus Christ, that our bodies are good, that they are precious gifts, that you have created us to use those bodies to receive and enjoy all the blessings you promise to those who trust in your Son, but also to use those bodies in service to our neighbors. One of the special ways in which you've given us to use our bodies is in marriage and sexuality and procreation. And we thank and praise you for allowing us to catch a glimpse and a foretaste of the fellowship and the love that you have for your church is reflected in our marriage relationships. And also that you invite us to participate in the privilege of creating new life through the miracle of procreation. We recognize, Lord, that because of our sinful nature, these gifts are often abused. And one of the most prominent of those abuses includes the objectification of the bodies around us through the viewing of pornography. We pray that by the grace and the forgiveness that your Son, Jesus Christ, earned for us in his passion and his resurrection, that you would turn our hearts from these sinful perspectives on sexuality and human bodies, so that we might understand the grave danger that they present, not only to our hearts and our eternities, but also to our relationships with people around us, and so that we might see ways in which we and the people around us can be set free from these sins to enjoy the gift of sexuality as you have designed it. We ask you to send your Holy Spirit to visit our assembly and enlighten our reflections, be especially with Pastor Johnson as he speaks the truth in love and delivers the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let all of our deliberations take place in a spirit of fellowship, and let us go forth equipped to be gospel-motivated voices for life. For the sake of Jesus Christ, your Son, we pray. Amen. Tonight's presenter, the Reverend Andrew Johnson, is pastor at Trinity Lutheran in Manila. No, he's not coming to us from the other side of the world. He's actually just coming to us from Iowa. It's Manila, Iowa. Pastor Johnson's one of the brand new staff members at Lutheran Family Service of Iowa, which is a longtime good friend of Lutherans for Life and an ally in For Life ministry. Pastor Johnson has served at Trinity for 4 years since he was called from the seminary in St. Louis. His wife, Tiffany, also is a deaconess who oversees youth ministry at their congregation. They grew up in Iowa and Missouri, and so the Midwest is truly their home. Pastor Johnson is going to talk to us about how pornography is actually a modern day pandemic, how and why people get addicted to pornographic materials, and most importantly, how to move from addiction to healing. So it is my privilege to introduce to you Pastor Johnson, who has some slides that he'll be using to guide us visually this evening, and he'll share his screen as we go forward. I would ask that during Pastor Johnson's presentation, you do please mute your microphone. I think almost everybody is muted. And if you have questions, go ahead and type them right in the chat box, and we'll get to those after we finish the presentation proper.
All right. Thank you so much, Pastor. And I'll share the screen here in a moment. As Pastor said, brand new to Lutheran Family Service. It's been about 5-ish months, something like that. Now that's since I've started working with them. However, I've had a long relationship with Lutheran Family Service. And tonight I'd like to encourage you guys as you do life advocacy. Lutheran Family Service does a lot. We provide counseling services for the depressed as well as the divorced and everything in between. We also do lobbying at our state level. We provide adoption services in Iowa as well as other states, and we're progressively adding more states to our list of places that we can do that. And we're one of the few Protestant Lutheran entities that is able to provide those Lutheran adoption services without receiving federal funding, which allows us to remain faithful to what God calls good. Now that said, this is not my first time with Lutheran Family Service, because 31 years ago, I was actually adopted through Lutheran Family Service. So I want to thank you guys as you do life advocacy, because I realize that sometimes it doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere or God is up to anything, but I'm here to tell you, I have life because of people like you and God's people taking his truth seriously. My birth mother received the resources she needed before the birth as well as after the birth because of life advocacy. And I was able to grow up in a Christian home just because of people like you. So please, please, please do not give up. It is not a waste of time. So that said, really quick, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and kind of jump in here. Alrighty. Okay. Can I get a thumbs up? Does it look okay? Okay, perfect. Now, of course, the problem with this presentation is a 3-hour presentation that we're going to, condense a lot. So I'm going to be jumping around a little bit. And the title itself, we have changed from a the pornography epidemic to a pandemic. So this isn't just sort of a localized regional thing. This is something that's affecting our entire world. And the question was brought up earlier, are we talking about pornography use in the church or the world? And quite frankly, both. And so this is something that's shaping our churches, it's shaping our kids, it's shaping our communities. And if we continue to be a society that objectifies women and men purely to be used, I mean, think about our language when it comes to pornography. You use porn, which also means you use people. So if we continue to use people and see them merely as an instrument, our perception of life and people will continue to go down the tubes. And some of the things that we're seeing in our culture and time, they're going to be worse. And so pornography is a part of that piece that we've got to take seriously in our church first, and then shape our communities and society as well. There's just so much to go through. We typically think about pornography as sort of this secret sin, secret in the sense that it damages relationships. It hurts relationships. We all kind of know that it exists. We know it exists in our churches. Statistically, it's just real. We know it exists in our communities. But the problem with it is it becomes a secret. It involves a lot of lying. It involves a lot of hiding. And when lying and hiding are involved in relationships with a spouse, from kid to parent, obviously it's going to damage relationships. So that's the secret aspect to it that we have to deal with. And I don't think I have to argue too hard that sex itself is used to sell a lot of stuff. It doesn't matter if it's a hamburger. It doesn't matter if it's a car. I would, if you just were watching some YouTube commercials or just watching basic cable TV, it would be interesting as well as maybe sad to just count how many commercials are utilizing sex in order to promote a product. And again, if this continues to be the trend, if we purely see people as an instrument to just benefit ourselves, life will continue to go down the tube, pure and simple. Unfortunately, the porn industry itself is something that generates over $13 billion annually just in the United States. That doesn't cover the entire world. This is a heartbreaking reality, but about 9 out of 10 boys or 6 out of 10 girls have been exposed to pornography before the age of 18. And the average age of first exposure is about 11 years old these days. Obviously, the trend is a little different than, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Rather than being print media, all porn is now all online. And it's just incredible, and again, in a sad sense, to see the increase of pornographic sites over a very, very short period of time. So first off, we want to think a little bit about what is kind of our scriptural perspective, Bible perspective on all of this. And I think the important thing the important place to start off is to say that sex itself is not bad. This is something that God has designed and created with intention and with purpose. And I think sometimes the church gets painted as this sort of anti-sex community, which is not the case. Again, God has designed us and purposed it. So sex itself is not bad. It's just like anything that is designed and created, there's purposes for it. And so when we get out of line of those design and purposes, we continue to add to almost the de-creation of God's good created world. And so that's what we're fighting against. And so some of the big places that we want to go to in terms of the beauty and the purpose of marriage is, of course, Genesis 1. We get this sort of prototype between Adam and Eve. And there's at least 3 major things that are happening within that relationship. And again, the key here is relationship. In a pornographic relationship, there really is no relationship. Again, you're just using somebody. It's all transactional. You're just taking something. And again, God has designed us as humans for relationship. And so if you remember in the early account, God looks at Adam, and Adam he sees all the other creatures, and he's sad because there's no one for him, and he lacks that relationship piece. And so then this is when Eve comes on the scene. But there's at least 3 major purposes for marriage and sex itself. Again, relationship building, huge. The second thing, mutual joy of one another. And finally, of course, procreation, if God blesses marriages with that piece. These are the big things. And it's not hard to go through those 3 major items and see how pornography does not relate or connect to those things. So relationship building, again, I already said it, but you are not building a relationship with that individual that you are watching. You're merely taking from them, objectifying them, and in some senses stealing from them. So it does not do the relationship building piece. Mutual joy, again, you're not building the relationship. You are, if I can say it this way, purely pleasing yourself. And then, of course, the having the children piece. Again, I don't think I have to fight too hard on that. Those things are lacking. Again, the biblical view of sex is that it is a good thing in the proper context in which God has designed and purposed it. And again, if people give you flack for being Christian and being so anti-sex, being anti-porn, whatever, one of the things that I like to, taking a step back, one of the things I absolutely adore about Christianity is that it is wildly and radically practical. It has something to say about almost, I would say, every issue that we face. And it tends to be pretty countercultural. Sometimes we miss it, but it's there. So I'm thinking about St. Paul, and he does something that's radically countercultural. He calls the Corinthians to make sure that husbands are giving conjugal rights to wives. In this Roman culture, wives had nothing. They had no rights. So this is so radically countercultural. And again, really shows us the relationship piece to sex and marriage and relationship, and why porn is antithetical to that, and why we are against it. Now, really quick, thinking about some biblical examples where sex goes awry. Again, the Bible is wildly practical and gives us insight into the human heart. Samson, I always like to tell my confirmation kids that when we typically think about Samson, we go through Sunday school and he's kind of like this cool guy. He's strong, and yes, he is physically strong, but when it comes to moral character, the guy's lacking. And he's going after women left and right, and he's just an incredible example about how the human heart, even somebody who has been chosen by God to lead and save the Israelites or be their judge, can go awry. Of course, David himself uses his king and authority to get a hold of Bathsheba when he's supposed to be fighting a war. He's not doing his job. Again, somebody who gets wrapped up in this, a guy who's after God's own heart, which is a great warning to us. This is not just sort of a society culture problem. This is something that happens in our churches all the time. And the human heart is such that it can suction cup onto false identities, false gods, and it's absolutely destructive. And it throws David's family for a whirlwind. And then Solomon, man, that guy has wives left and right and concubines. And what we see in the biblical account is that he's pulled in so many directions that it makes you wonder his standing before God by the time you get to the end of the biblical account. I would really challenge you when just for some fun homework, go read Solomon's story, and you're left wondering things about Solomon. As great and wonderful and wise as a king he is, it makes you wonder. So really quick, when we talk about the definition of pornography itself, pornography comes from some fun Greek words. First off, I'm going to think about the graphy, if you will, the graphy. If you think about it, you can see some words in there that we use in our everyday English, like graphic or graphite. So this is talking about things that are written or images. And then porneo is this verb that or noun and that can think about or refer to things that are evil, or typically and almost exclusively in the New Testament refers to things that are sexual immorality or sexual in nature. It's almost the exclusive use of it in the New Testament. But maybe another helpful way, especially as we think about this topic in terms of life advocacy, is we're talking about things with pornography that are counter to God's good world. We're talking about something that is destructive and decreative when it comes to what God has called good. And so when we're talking with people about why pornography is not useful, we can use our creational language to say, well, this world is designed and purposed in such a way, when I'm working against it, I'm hurting people, I'm going against the grain of how God has designed the world, which will not only have impact on you personally, but families as well as individuals who are caught up in the porn industry itself. So I would highly encourage you to think about pornography in terms of creational language. This is stuff that is against God's good and intention created world. It goes against it. Now, some statistics, and this is how I use these in my congregation. It's about once a month, I try to have a piece in the bulletin that includes statistics about pornography and its use. So some of the things that we're seeing is 1 in 3 Americans seek out porn at least once a month, 33%. Um, in terms of marital infidelity, it increases the rate by 300%. So when you talk to divorced couples these days, one of the not necessarily contributing factor, but definitely a component of it, or at least it's a trend we're seeing, is that pornography was a piece in there. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but if we have time, what women feel, and pornography is uh, highly more used among males and females, but it's not that females aren't using it. But what women are saying, especially in a counseling setting, is how do I compete with this other person that my husband is so saturated with? Um, uh, the beauty, the I'm there anytime you want, and so women just feel absolutely degraded, and because there's this sort of competition piece that enters once pornography is entered into a relationship. And so when it comes to divorce rates and whatnot, we're seeing that pornography, again, it may not be a contributing factor, but it's definitely a factor that's definitely in there. Some other things that are going on: around half of adults 25 and older say viewing porn is wrong, while among teens and young adults, so 13 to 24 years of age, only a third say viewing porn is wrong. And if you watch sort of modern television shows, comedies and whatnot, um, porn is sort of thrown around in such a flippant sort of way, like it is no big deal. It's just sort of an accepted norm. And it's just so fascinating because the word itself from the Greek, it means sort of evil writing. So the fact that we're just using this word and it's not really, it's just sort of it's either or it's definitely not evil. It's just sort of something that's sort of accepted is very, very interesting. 71% of adults and 85% of teens and young adults who have viewed pornography did so online. So again, the big trend these days is it's moving away from print media in terms of pornography, and it's almost exclusively online, which should be a very big warning to us and a call to action in our congregations, our families, and I don't know what it looks like in our society, but we have got to take it seriously when it comes to phone usage and when it comes to access to computers. Maybe and maybe not. Honestly, it's getting to the point where kids aren't necessarily using computers like I would. It's almost getting out of style, having a desktop at home. But when we hand our kids a phone that has access to the internet, and quite frankly, my kids are way sharper than I will ever be. They will always be ahead of me in terms of modern trends. They will always be ahead of me in terms of knowing the sort of getting around stuff. So we have to be very intentional about just handing a phone to our kid, because it's so much more than just, hey, now you can call me when you want me to pick me up from cross country or something like that. No. There is it's just a world out there that they have access to. And to also think of it this way: how many times have you been online and you weren't intentionally looking for anything and stuff pops up? My wife the other day was telling me that she was reading a story how I think maybe it was in the Wall Street. No, another pastor was telling me about the Wall Street Journal and how they had set up an account, a fake account, and they had said that they were 13 years old, and they still found that on this account, and I think it was like Snapchat or something like that, or TikTok, that this supposed 13-year-old was still being targeted with very sexual, explicit material. So when it comes to phone apps that are highly popular among our teens and kids, TikTok, Snapchat, they don't care. They don't care. So when our kids have access to it, we just absolutely have to be careful. And, we also have to speak up. We just have to speak up. Again, one of the statistics that we find is that 95% of families have not had a conversation about pornography in homes. And of course, that includes Christian families too. And kind of the expectation is the schools will take on that role, which I'm not sure that's necessarily what we want to pass on or give that responsibility to. So again, all that said, we just need to be really intentional about handing our kids a phone, and also our trust in very popular apps that our kids are going to, because the sexually explicit material is there. Our kids see it whether they want to or not, and it's really easy to get wrapped up in this pandemic. Some other things that are going on. Unsolicited porn has increased. Nearly 3/4 of young adults, 71%, and half of teens come across what they consider porn at least once a month, whether they are seeking it or not. And more than half of women 25 years and under seek out porn. So while men are typically more likely to be the ones who are utilizing pornography, we're seeing a growing trend where it's no longer a men versus women. It's sort of an everything. And just think about it for a second. We had this thing called a global pandemic, and I realize it's still going on, but I think I can safely say that the implications of it were far more reaching in 2020 than say now. And so what happened? Everybody was in their home. Everyone was stuck by themselves. Everybody was isolated. So while maybe we haven't seen all the implications of it yet, this pandemic of pornography we're going to see the results of 2020 here shortly, because people were isolated by themselves. And what do? What we find is that porn use is not just for sexual arousal. Some people just go there because they're bored. So what do you do when you're locked inside? So the implications of porn use are have only been heightened because of our pandemic and being isolated. Just another thing that just blows me away. So in 1998, so if you can remember back then, and I'm pretty sure maybe I had dial-up back then, and I'm still haunted by that sound of dial-up. But in 1998, there were 14 million websites or web pages dedicated to pornography. By 2003, so 5-ish years later, there was 260 million pages. By 2006, there were 420 million pages. And now in the present, and again, this is probably out of date, but now you're looking at 23 billion pages on the internet dedicated to pornography. So if you need to convince people in our congregations or in our communities that this is an issue, it's just right there. Just go ahead and share it with them. Again, just some more information in terms of what's going on. One of the striking things to me is in terms of the porn industry's annual income, it is more than the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB combined. Also, it is more than the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC. This is huge. 47% of families in the United States reported that pornography is a problem in their home. 56% of American divorces involve one party having an obsessive interest in pornographic websites. And 68% of church-going men, over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis, and of young Christian adults 18 to 24 years old, 76% actively search for porn. Teens and young adults have encouraging or accepting conversations toward porn. We talked about this a little earlier, but when they talk about porn with friends, 89% of teens, 95% of young adults say they do so in a neutral, accepting, or encouraging way. Again, this is not something that's viewed as evil. And only 1 in 20 young adults and 1 in 10 teens say their friends think viewing pornography is a bad thing. And again, the hard thing, we know this is an issue, but 95% of parents and grandparents have never talked with children about porn. And this isn't just a parent-grandparent thing, this is also a thing in our pulpits too. This is something that we've not really addressed in great detail. This is not something necessarily in congregations, and this is something I'm trying to figure out at my own congregation. How do we make available resources to our congregations that help people get out of addiction? So is it buying memberships to some of these websites that provide filters and accountability? Maybe it's something like that. But of course, the big thing is nobody is coming out and saying, hey, I have a porn addiction. Nobody is raising their hand. Because again, porn is an isolating addiction. And what the devil likes to do is say, hey, get involved in this activity. And then what he does next is he says, oh, you awful person, you, how would you ever do that? Nobody will think highly of you, or, for other people will think very lowly of you, that you're awful, that you're scum. And so then what do? You keep on, you get in this cycle of addiction, and you become more and more isolated, that nobody can love you or forgive you or show you grace. Because again, this addiction, it's just awful. It's just awful. So, if people try to argue that that there are useful things about the porn industry, some of the things that we're seeing coming out of it is organized crime, as well as slavery, as well as STDs that go along with it. Again, we've stressed that the industry itself is massive throughout the world, a $97 billion industry, and a large percentage of that is represented by American youth. Now, really quick, some of the reasons why men view pornography versus women, there are some different things that we've noted. The first thing, and maybe the most obvious, is just sort of physical lust. Guys seem to be motivated a little bit more by visual stimulus, and pornography provides that to men. There's also sort of this passive pleasure that goes along with it. So this goes back to our relationship conversation. With pornography, you do not have to invest in that other person. You purely use them, you're done, you go away. Whereas with a marriage, you actually have to try. You have to show up, you have to love your wife, you have to listen, you have to go above and beyond. You got to lay your life on the railroad tracks if need be. But with pornography, you can go use that person and go away. So with passive pleasure, you can turn it off and turn on your brain really, really easy. The other thing that we're seeing with men is it's just sort of an escape, kind of like going home and drinking or something like that. It's a way of escaping the world. And really, pornography is a fantasy world where it's sort of like you have your own little harem there, and anybody will oh man, we love you. It provides an escape to men. There's also the secrecy, and the secrecy and kind of the pride thing sort of go hand in hand together. But sometimes we used to say, like, the thrill of the chase. Sometimes guys just like to go after somebody in order just to see if they can get somebody. And so this goes along with porn. And what porn says is that any woman can come and love you and be with you and adore you. So there's a pride and a secrecy piece in there as well. Some of the things we're also seeing in there is sort of this false intimacy. So maybe marriage is not going well for a variety of reasons. And again, this other person seems to give you the impression that they are there for you, they love you, they would do anything for you. And then finally, sometimes the forbidden fruit is a lure for men as well. The fact that you shouldn't have it makes it enticing. And this goes to an ancient pastor, Augustine, who talks about in his autobiography how he stole a pear or fruit. And when he was looking back at it, he's like, why did I want to steal that pear of fruit? I didn't need it. I didn't eat it. I just wanted it just to see if I could steal it. So just for the sake of doing it, that was the issue. So those are some of the reasons why men may go to pornography. With women, there are some things that are similar, but also different. Again, women may, and I realize I'm over generalizing for the sake of time, but women may be seeking relationship through this other person that they see on the screen, and this person seems to offer that through this video or medium. And again, this goes through intimacy. This is somebody who will be there for you. They will, they're there for you whenever you turn on your phone, whenever you turn on your computer, no questions asked. They're just there for you. One of the other things that we note in our counseling is that there could be a relationship problem or deficiency from the past, whether it's a father, whether it's a whoever, somebody in the past that maybe that relationship was not what it was supposed to be. So in order to make up for that deficiency in that past relationship, again, whether it's a father or whoever, this person on the screen fills in the gap that that person perceives. And then also it's just sort of commonplace. Again, the stats just show that people just sort of accept that that pornography is a part of who you are as a person. So women just use it because everybody else does. It's sort of an unthinking action. Now, one of the things that does pop up is, okay, well, is what I'm watching art? Is when I'm watching art, and I think I saw a story the other day where a public school teacher was trying to separate bad porn versus good porn, and coming up with this criteria for what is good, what is bad, and typically it just comes down to whether or not the person on the screen is consenting. Again, our issue is that if the sexual relationship is not forming relationship or forcing two people to be one, if this act is not for the mutual enjoyment of both people, if it is not, assuming if God blesses it for procreation, it's not a sex act because it is decreating creation itself. And so some people will argue that pornography itself is art, even among child porn, where children are manipulated and whatnot. But really quick, it is not protected by First Amendment rights whatsoever. And thankfully, we're going after that. But the issue with pornography is that it typically displays acts that are progressive or corrosive. So it doesn't show relationship building whatsoever. It's just, I'm going to use this person and they're going to make me happy. It's also oppressive. It exploits the most vulnerable, children as well as women. And often pornography exhibits violent behavior, even rape. And so if you go to the art museum, you don't go to see works of art that demonstrate oppressiveness like this or violence like this. Obviously, the destructive piece, this destroys. Art does not typically destroy marriages, careers, incomes, relationship with God, or humanity itself. Art does not do that. Art builds it up. Good art should exhibit and celebrate the works of God's creation. That's what good art does. Again, pornography does not do that. It's a violation of boundaries itself, whether it's social or family boundaries. And again, this is a doorway to addiction. And this is, again, a vicious cycle, because when the addiction begins, it's what we notice is that what we would call simple acts of sexual behavior are no longer useful to that person. You have to ramp it up in terms of the explicitness of the video itself or what's being watched. So sometimes it can morph from what we would call a typical sex act or something into child abuse or even bestiality. So this pornography addiction doesn't just sort of stay the same. It morphs into even worse things as we progressively move on. And of course, art typically doesn't get you locked up in jail, which pornography can do, depending on what it involves. So if the argument is made, is it art? Absolutely not, because it involves the exploitation of people. And even if it's consenting people, it's still exploiting two people, where it's just an act of using somebody else in order to make you happy. Now, one of the things that that's said is that pornography is sort of a private sin. You do it by yourself and nobody else is affected by it. But what we're finding is that there are a ton of implications that actually affect our churches, affects our culture. And so it's an absolute lie to say that pornography is sort of this, it's almost like we say, it's like this nice little kitty cat. It's domesticated. We can keep it safe. No, it's a roaring lion, and it can tear your arm off and destroy people in the process. So some of the things that we're seeing is the physical problems with pornography itself is erectile dysfunction. again, what happens is if a guy gets so wrapped up in pornography, the relationship between wife and husband gets affected by that, because if the wife is no longer fulfilling his fantasies, it can lead to physical realities. And again, pornography itself is sort of this fantasy world, and again, the twistedness of the sexual material gets ramped up, and the more it's ramped up, it's going to affect the relationship between husband and wife, because wife will, let's say it's a husband, wife will feel like she can no longer meet needs, compete, and again, husband may have very real physical implications from this. Some of the things that we're seeing too, let me jump ahead really quick, sorry. Some of the things that we're also seeing, and why porn is so problematic and so addictive, is that the dopamine release, so kind of the pleasure chemical, just to be overly simplistic, the pleasure chemical dopamine, it lasts longer when it comes to porn. So I know it's a little hard to see, but the more light, or the greener bar there, it shows that in terms of hours, dopamine output, it goes high really fast and it lasts a longer time. Whereas things like nicotine, food, cocaine, you have very quick highs, but then it goes away really fast. Whereas with porn, and why it's so addictive, is that the dopamine release lasts for a longer period of time. And so the more you get wrapped into it, the more that you require more in order to feel physically well. Again, kind of a similar, and again, I apologize, it's a little blurry, but you see the same thing again, where the dopamine output from porn lasts longer than cocaine itself. So this is why this is so problematic and scary. Now, going back a little bit really quick, this is that terrible cycle that happens when it comes to this addiction, because what happens is the devil plays on, convinces you, or it was a part of this process, and says, do this. This is fine. This is normal. Everyone accepts it. But once you get into it, then the guilt sets in, what we typically call the law, and says, look, you should not be doing this. And the devil says, ooh, I'm going to use this law. This is pretty great. And I'm going to crush this person because you're bad. You are unworthy of any of God's love, his grace, and other feelings or other things that go along with it. No one will ever love me. And so if no one ever loves you, then you have to continue the addiction, because there's no way you could ever have a relationship with somebody who is quote unquote real. And this goes with, no one can take care of me except that person. And the other thing too is, sex becomes the greatest need in your life. We talk about false gods in our Lutheran theology and in Christian theology itself, false gods. And Luther talks about how a god is anything you go to in order to feel full, whole control of your life. And what this porn addiction does is says, the thing that makes you human is by satisfying this sexual need. That's what makes you human. Whereas God's view of humans and what God calls good. And so what this addiction does is it radically distorts what makes you a full human. The emotional piece too, again, this is not a secret, hidden sort of experience. It affects also your emotional well-being as well. If you remember being a kid, and let's say you stole a cookie from the cookie jar, you remember how hard that was, because you didn't want grandma to find out, or you didn't want mom to find out. And so you would cover your tracks and cover the fact that there were crumbs on the counter or whatever. You would just work really hard to make sure nobody knew. And you probably worked on your story about who was actually responsible, because maybe a squirrel came in through the window and, oh no. Point being, you worked really hard to keep this a secret. And quite frankly, when you do that, it's draining. And so when it comes to this porn addiction, keeping it secret wears on you, because it's hard keeping your story straight for starters, but also the secrecy in terms of relationships. When you have that secret with another person, you are no longer able to be honest and truthful with that person. And one of the beautiful things with Garden of Eden and all that is that originally Adam and Eve are naked. They are able to be with one another without any sort of boundaries. And of course, that's affected by the fall. But one of the things that's slowly being restored, will not be fully restored until Christ comes back, but one of the things that's being restored in a marriage relationship is two people who can share intimacy and closeness with one another. But emotionally, when porn is added to the picture, this becomes something you have to hide. And it wears on this two-person relationship, because now there's a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, seventh person that's being added to that relationship, and you have to keep them away from it. So again, it affects us physically. It also affects us emotionally as well. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we've kind of already hinted on it. Obviously, it's going to affect marital relationships. We've already noted that women in counseling situations feel like they are competing with another bride, if you will, and it wears on that relationship, and it makes that other person who may not be involved with pornography to feel inferior as a human being. And so, point being, this is not sort of a secret individual. Nobody is affected by this kind of sin. No, lots of people are. And so I wanted to share this. Again, we kind of hit on this, but this is just a good thing to share with people, especially in congregations. Go figure. People don't like to share their spouse, if God designed it that way. We need to think about pornography in terms of adultery, where adultery, if you were to adulterate, well, let me take a step back. I went through cancer treatments a couple of times, and first one was when I was in college, and I was in the hospital, and I was supposed to have potassium, and I said, "Hey, could I have a banana?" They said, "No, you need straight potassium." I said, "Oh, bummer." And at that point, I really wanted a Pepsi. I felt awful, but I felt good enough to drink a soda. And I said, "Hey, can I have a soda?" And they said, "Sure." And they said, "Also, you need your potassium." I said, "Okay." They mix the straight potassium with that soda. And I don't know if you've had straight potassium. I think I would prefer to eat, I don't know. I can't think of an analogy. Point being, it tasted awful. Why? Because that soda should not have been adulterated. Something should not have been added to it, like potassium. It really messes things up. And so when it comes to pornography, you have in a marriage relationship something that is being added to it that shouldn't, and of course it's going to mess up the taste. And even if we're talking about two people who are not married, maybe we're talking about people who are young and looking towards marriage or something like that, your expectations of your sexual life will be shaped and designed by what you have watched. And so what porn does is says, this is what a typical sex life looks like. But again, we're talking about a fantasy world. And if your future spouse is incapable of meeting what your expectations, again, that is going to shape the course of your relationship with your spouse. One of the huge things, and it's so interesting in our culture where we are trying to value all types of people, why we have not jumped more on pornography, or why we have such a flippant attitude about pornography, makes absolutely no sense. Because again, I don't have to tell you, but women become just an object, something that you use to make you happy. It's simply just a activity, and in some situations, again, slavery is involved. Sex slavery can be involved, even within the United States. And so now this person isn't even a person; they're purely property. And so that's why we have to take this seriously. And then the other thing too, again, we've talked a little bit about this, is there's spiritual implications about porn. This is not just sort of a you by yourself sort of thing. This affects how you see yourself. This affects how you see yourself in relationship to God. And if you have crushing guilt and you're being convinced that you can never be forgiven, if you can never be loved again, that, you know what, you should crawl up into a little ball and die, how can you possibly re-relate to God? And so the spiritual implication is that it shapes how you see your eternal destiny. And so this is really important because, and this goes for any sin, we really need to be careful, especially in the church, to not have a high and mighty attitude if we are not involved in pornography. And St. Paul talks about this, I believe it's in Galatians, where it's you need to be careful yourself, because you could just as easily fall and you are just as big a sinner too. So be very, very careful. And so we need to have a lot of pity. We need to have a lot of grace for people who are dealing with this addiction, because it's not that they're just trapped in an addiction. They're also trapped in a spiritual battle as well, one in which their soul is on the line. So this is why we've got to take this absolutely and radically seriously within our churches. Really quick. So some of the signs that maybe somebody is developing a relationship with porn itself, some of the things you want to be looking for, like with any addiction, is maybe some basic responsibilities are being ignored, whether it's at home, chores, parenting, work. What we're finding is that sometimes people are accessing porn at work. There's no boundaries to where you can access it. So if basic responsibilities, especially from somebody that you can typically count on, are going by the wayside, this can or might be a sign that something is going on. The other one that kind of sticks out to me is the person you're dealing with, are they down? Are they frustrated? Are they beating themselves up in a way that is not all that typical of what you've seen from them? The other thing too that you want to track is are large sums of money being utilized? Now, typically with porn, a lot of it you can find for free. However, like anything, you can pay for it. But with any addiction, whether it's alcohol, gambling, money is involved. And what we've seen with like gambling addictions, like porn, usually, penny slots are not necessarily good enough. They're good enough for a while, but then it ramps up, and then maybe eventually it gets to horse racing and stuff like that. And what we know with porn is that eventually what you're watching has to be radically crazy, the kind of porn that you probably have to pay for. So if somebody is, notice somebody who is losing on money or not using money well, that could potentially be a sign. And of course, again, looking for sadness, anxiety, insomnia, other mental issues as well. Now, I know we're getting close on time, but really quick, wanted to share some practical things with you really quick. There's a handful of programs out there that provide filters, that provide accountability for people who may be utilizing, who may be trapped in a pornography addiction. One of those out there is Covenant Eyes. And there's another one, Canopy. That's one of the more recent ones that I've noted too. Typically, what they're going to do is you're going to pay in order to, if a sexually explicit website is accessed, that will send a message to a trusted friend or somebody with the organization itself, so that follow-up can happen. What we've seen is that when it comes to porn addictions, it's typically not good to put them in a program that takes people out of their natural environment or setting. What we want to do is redo our habits in such a way that we can still live kind of in our natural habitat. So when it comes to porn addictions, it's typically not helpful to take people and put them in say a program that takes them to another place, because the concern is, and what we're seeing is that the addiction typically rehashes itself. But there are these sort of programs that allow people to live at home, be at home, that provides accountability. And like I said earlier, I'm trying to think about at my own congregation, how can we utilize these resources for the sake of our congregation members? Because the statistics don't lie. Our churches are involved with it. Our people are involved with it. Our kids are involved with it. And I realize that there are costs that come with like Covenant Eyes and other programs, but souls are on the line. So how much is a soul? How much is that, how much do we value that individual? And maybe as churches, this is something that we need to step up in order to provide the people resources in order to deal with this addiction. So maybe the last thing for you really quick, for pastors and people, everybody, this is something that we need to be talking about in the pulpit, as well as in our publications, whether it's newsletters, bulletins, emails, whatever. I think maybe the starting point is acknowledging in our congregations that it is a very real problem. Obviously, we see it in society, but it's everywhere. One of the things that we've done at our congregation is Lutheran Hour Ministries has a nice little brochure available on spiritual warfare and porn use. And what we've done is we place those in our bathrooms. So because typically people aren't going to want to come up to a board with all these pamphlets and then be like, oh, I'm going to take out the porn one. Just again, this is an isolating sin. So if there are ways that you can put resources in people's hands to at least get the process starting, that provides some people maybe some confidentiality, it might go a long way. And these resources themselves, like the Lutheran Hour Ministries piece, I mean, these are like 50 cents a piece for a brochure. So this is something really, really doable. Some other things that we really encourage you to do is have conversations in your families. Again, 95% of families do not talk about porn and its problems. So have conversations. If your congregational leaders, provide resources for your parents to have conversations. Ask for all people in your church to pray for this, especially women for their guys, and pastors out there. Maybe this is something that you maybe once a month you are praying for this in your prayer of the church. Make it out there, because people will catch on that this is something that we take seriously, and by extension we take life seriously too. And this is not a proper exposition on life pornography. You could really go all out and challenge your men to make a porn-free commitment, even those who are not struggling, so we can all work on this together. And there's some resources out there that I can share later that give you kind of the framework how to do that. And maybe the last one, make it a regular part of your preaching ministry, as well as Bible study to hit on this topic. Make it regular. So guys, there's plenty of more stuff I could talk about, but I'm going to stop there. So let me pull this down. So you let me know how you want to go forward.
Applause. Thank you so much, Pastor Johnson, for sharing that wide variety of information. I'm sure there's a lot of points in there that a lot of us have not been acquainted with before. I want to dive right in, though, to the questions and answers. Daniel Johnson shared one on the chat, and it actually reflects kind of a thought that I had. And that has to do with the intersection between porn use and sanctity of life. So Daniel, would you like to ask your question of Pastor Johnson?
Oh, sure. So it seems to me that pornography promotes a use and discard mentality. And we see that also in serial marriage and serial dating. And I was wondering if you could comment on the nexus between those issues.
Yeah, I think, and there's lots of things I think, whether they're right or not is the question. But one of the things in our Western culture is the radical praise of the individual. So we are not community-based, we are not family-based, whereas other cultures tend to be more family-based. And of course, there's sins and problems that come with those. But because of this praise of the individual is never wrong. We see this abuse of life with pornography. When it comes to serial relationships, it's no longer about the sanctity of that individual. It's not about meeting their needs. It's not about building them up. It's about you as the individual. So I think maybe at least one of the connecting points among those topics or realities we're seeing in life is the fact that we are in a culture that has idolized the self, the individual, and what we're seeing is that the self and the individual is really good about stepping on other selves and other individuals and destroying them, and it's just damaging us left and right.
Pastor, in my capacity, both with Lutherans for Life and when I was in the parish, it seemed to me that porn use, porn addiction, actually served a similar purpose to a lot of other addictions, in that, there is a high or an attraction to the activity itself. And here I think, at the risk of maybe being crass and offensive, I think we do need to be explicit for folks and recognize that statistically, viewing porn often involves masturbation as well. And that's sort of part of the high there. It's a physical effect on the brain. In the same way that substance abuse or, a food addiction, not only do those things provide kind of a physiological reward, but what I found when counseling with folks dealing with porn addiction was that, much like those substances or food or drink, it was being used to medicate for some other wound, some other injury, some other hurt. And I bring that up because I'm interested to hear you talk about how that can be an avenue for the gospel.
Yeah, so many thoughts come to my mind, and I think I had hit on earlier that when it comes to women and porn use, sometimes that's a avenue to meet a damaged relationship from the past, whether that's a relationship, a fallen relationship between a father or whoever. So I think that's spot on, Pastor, that a lot of our addictions, well, maybe we need to think about it this way. I think we see addictions as sort of like this evil act, which is true, but maybe also seeing addiction as a form of worship, where this action, whether it's alcohol or porn, involves a sacrifice. It involves sacrifice of relationships. If you follow Jesus, Jesus says your life is not going to be easy. In fact, some people are going to be cut out of your life. But same thing can happen with an addiction. In order to make the God of porn happy, or at least maybe sex, maybe that's a better way of putting it, the God of sex or pleasure happy, maybe you're going to have to sacrifice your relationship to your spouse. Maybe you're going to have to sacrifice your income. Just thinking about alcohol addiction, how much money is spent? Holy smokes, it's so much. Point being, though, these false gods require an act of worship and a sacrifice. And typically we go to these, or often we go to these false gods, as Luther says, in order to meet a need, because a God is somebody who provides all care and protection and whatnot. And so maybe the stepping into the gospel piece is acknowledging that, yes, you are a human and you have needs. However, your needs will not be fully met if you continue to go down this route and continue to worship this particular God. but rather you need to be connected to the God who doesn't demand things from you, but actually gave his whole entire life for you. And so this is the opposite piece. This is the gospel piece. All false gods demand, take. But when we look at the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth, he gives. So what we really need to tell people is that you are underselling yourself by going to this false God. And really, you need to become rich by experiencing Jesus of Nazareth.
Fantastic, absolutely, and that gives us, so many starting points to think about. Recognizing that the law doesn't change behavior, right? The law doesn't produce repentance. It is the gospel that does that, and so our care for loved ones who may be struggling with porn addiction or porn use, our remedy for ourselves, if we're struggling with that, ministry in our congregations is always going to have a prominent place for understanding that God's acceptance of you is unconditional, and pornography, substance abuse, like you said, those gods cannot provide that for you, right? And the truth is, folks who are addicted to those things or anything, a lot of times have already experienced that, right? They've already recognized this thing just takes from me, and I don't want it to take anymore, but I don't see another way. So I'm grateful that you help flesh out that perspective on. I think a lot of times we, as Christians, we recognize in our heads all sins are equally damning before the law. But there are still some that offend our sensibilities, our sensitivities more than others. There are some that seem grosser to us, and that disgust factor, I think, can prevent us from realistically encountering that in our own lives and the lives of the people around us. Michelle had a question. Michelle's our Y for Life director, and so she works with youth and has, I think, a very relevant question that we're all kind of wondering. Michelle?
Yeah, sure. So like Pastor Solomon said, I've worked with youth now for 23 years. Okay, I've taught high school, now work with high school and college students. And so I'm wondering if you have any information on when those, any statistics on when that porn addiction begins. I, like you, have read that first interaction happens maybe around age 11. I had actually even read that sometimes as young as age 9. And in my experience in a middle school setting, the first 4 years of teaching, I would say I would not be surprised. And again, I was teaching at Lutheran schools. So I guess I think it's really hard to get through high school and college without seeing it, let alone dabbling in it. I know in my own high school classroom, students brought the issue up. At times we would be reading about different issues. I was an English teacher, and it would come up, and I would just set aside English and we would talk about this reality, right? This is dangerous stuff. So I guess, what more can we do to educate our young people? I know my husband teaches it in confirmation, but he's had a lot of pushback from some families because he does bring it up, and families are like, wait, my kid is not ready for that. And yet statistics show your kid has probably already seen it. So anyway, I would love to hear what you have to say for, how do we engage youth earlier and protect them?
Yeah, and this is something I'm trying to work with my own youth too, and this is sort of a learning piece for me. I think, as Pastor had said earlier, one of the problems is because of the nature of the sin, we can stigmatize what's going on. And sometimes what happens when we stigmatize something is it prevents a conversation. So I'm really happy that you and your husband are able to have a conversation. You know what? Honestly, if you want an endorsement, keep on talking about it, because you're 100% right. The kids are seeing this, whether parents acknowledge it or not. And I think even some pastors are maybe in a state of denial that this is such a rampant issue. And maybe what can help us kind of destigmatize and allow us to have conversation is to remember that when kids first encounter porn, they typically have no idea what's going on. When you see kids encounter it at a younger age, there's not a full understanding of what's happening, of what should be happening, between an actual in a stable God ordained relationship, and so there's this curiosity. There's also this sort of innocence. So rather than being angry at our kids or how dare they just don't know. And so appreciating that when kids may first encounter it, this is just something that they just need some help contextualizing. And it's just an opportunity. You don't need to go into freak out mode. And I kind of wonder maybe if some parents are concerned about talking about this in confirmation because, no, you don't need to freak out. We can have a conversation, and you know what, at the end of the day, God is still going to love us, and Jesus is still in control. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but just appreciating that when kids, as you said, the age is going down and down, down, down when kids first encounter it. Typically when kids first encounter it, they just don't know what's going on and they need help contextualizing it. And that allows us not to be so afraid of having these conversations. And again, I would highly commend you to keep on doing what you're doing, because again, the statistics show 95% of families aren't having these conversations. So keep on having the conversations. Encourage your youth workers, your teachers, your pastors, keep on talking about it. And maybe one of the reasons there's pushback is because we've hidden it and we're afraid to talk about it. But the more, in a weird way, pornography conversation is kind of like the stewardship conversation in church. Like we're afraid to talk about, maybe we should, give back to God. Oh, what if somebody freaks out? What if we talk about porn in church? No, but we can have these conversations, and the more that we are afraid to have these conversations, the more our children will suffer. So please keep on talking to your kids about it. I hope that's helpful. I don't know if it was, but
I did share in the chat. Lutherans for Life has a fantastic volume called Teaching Children Chastity for Life that includes scripts for parents to have some of those conversations with their kids. The bottom line is kind of twofold. Ultimately, number one, the best practice in your own home is to ensure that the sex talk is never just one conversation, but that it's an ongoing relationship and conversation, really from the time kids are old enough to understand that they have a body until into adulthood. And so in addition to that, I included another volume that's been helpful to me. It's kind of the gold standard of how to prepare parents for having those kind of conversations all the way along with their children. And the wonderful thing about that is, and that's kind of the second point of emphasis, is inoculating against pornography usage and porn addiction is not just a matter of telling our young people what God says no to. It's also a matter of casting before them the vision of what God has said yes to, right? It's very effective to tell our kids, we're not going to have chocolate cake right now because we're going to have a steak and corn on the cob dinner, right? Which is way better, right? And so what's way better than this? Porn is a cheap imitation and a poor substitute for the relationships, the acceptance that God gives, lifetime of marriage and sexuality, procreation and family. And so continue to have those conversations in age-appropriate ways, of course, with our kids, I think is honestly one of the best ways to inoculate them going forward, right? an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Plus, why would we not want to share with our children what wonderful things God has intended their body for, the blessings that they can receive and the ways that they can serve their neighbors. So those two resources are in the chat.
And one more thing I'd like to throw in there is encouraging parents to believe that they are the major influencer of their kids. The Lutheran, I can't remember who did it. I don't know if it was just the LCMS in general, but they had done a thorough study on youth and their relationship in terms of how faith is developed. And I'm blanking on the statistic, how it worked, but pretty much what it came down to is the main influencer in a child's life is the parent or the parents. It is. And I see a lot of parents in my congregation who just do not believe that. So equipping parents to believe the truth that God has uniquely placed them in a very close relationship to this young person, and that they are the most significant influencer. It's not pastor, it's not church worker, it's the parent. So believing that, and that can be really vital when it comes to having these conversations about sex and its proper role.
And Pastor, I think that raises maybe a blind spot that we've had, but one that's very important. I'm not only am I not a girl, that might seem pretty obvious, but I'm also the parent of only boys. And so I've not had to raise a girl. There have been many times over the course of being married for 21 years when this conversation has happened between my wife and I. I will see a young person, a young girl usually, who I judge to be dressed inappropriately, right? Clothing is too revealing, it's too suggestive. And I ask my wife, why is she wearing that? What motivates her? Does she know that she is communicating certain things with this kind of attire? Do her parents know that? And the insightful thing that my wife has suggested to me from time to time is a lot of times the reason why a young person is choosing that kind of attire is because a role model in their life is choosing that kind of attire. This is the way that mom is dressing. And so I think one of our blind spots is the assumption that all of our adults, our peers, our brothers and sisters in Christ, our congregation members, they have a complete and healthy picture of what the gift of sexuality is all about. When in fact, it might not just be the young people that we need to study these things with from a biblical perspective. It very well may be all of us as adults, even some of us who have been raised in the church, who may have gotten mistaken impressions, or sometimes the pains or the appetites of the flesh can lead us in a particular direction. But I think that's a thing to keep in mind as well. Is it's appropriate conversation to talk to our adults about, and not just assume that everybody understands a biblical perspective. Michelle had raised her hand, I think.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right in the sense, in many ways, in my interactions with youth, many of them wanted to have the conversation, but they felt that it was not a conversation they could have with their parents because their parents were not open to it, or that they just felt very uncomfortable with it. And so I think going back to what Pastor Johnson said, reminding the parents that they are the greatest influencers, right? And that conversation should get started young and early. Again, age appropriately. Like Pastor Solomon, we are raising 2 boys, right? And every child is different, and every child needs that conversation in different contexts at different times. And again, multiple times. But what I found in working with youth is that when they found out I was willing to talk to them about it and tell them, hey, this is why you wait, this is what you're waiting for, right? That they were eager to do so, even among their peers, right? In a classroom conversation. So I think being open to the conversation is essential, and giving adults the ability or the maybe the words to say, reminding them that it's okay to be real and not know what to say sometimes too. To say, you know, this probably makes you uncomfortable, kind of makes me uncomfortable too, but this is important stuff and we need to talk about it.
And really quick, just to interject really fast, you have never ever melted into a puddle of anything after having that conversation, correct? You are still standing, you are still here. You know, maybe it was a little awkward, but I think we can trust and say that in the midst of some of the most hardest, awkward conversations, God still brings us through them. We're still here.
Other folks.
I have a comment.
My sister Monica.
I happen to live in a pornographic state, which is the state of Illinois. And unfortunately, despite a hard fought battle, our governor just signed into law a very aggressive sex ed bill, SB 818. And I'm gonna tell you, I'm a district life coordinator, and with the help of the other two districts in my state, this was a hard fight. We fought with our brothers and sisters in other church denominations, as well as the general public. And we only needed one vote to have this thing not happen. And what's happened is that people in the church, as well as people in the general public, have handed their kids over to the public schools, and they want them to teach them everything. And now it's that analogy of the frog in the cold pot of water, the heat's getting turned up. And that's what's happening here in Illinois. And this sex education that we're going to roll out next fall is pornographic. There's no other way to describe it. I've seen the curriculum. I've seen the drawings, the verbiage and everything. And so, we're saying to our Lutherans who have kids in the public school, you only have one choice, and that's to battle your school board not to allow it into your school. But I think we can strongly suggest that this is a really serious time to reevaluate handing your kids over to the public schools for everything but the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3. I mean, 1, 2, 3s. And I know that's a big picture thing, but you can see how this has gotten so dumbed down that we are going to have in our state kindergartners questioning their gender, learning about oral and anal sex. I mean, I'm serious. I won't even say the rest of the words. So there's a parent responsibility that we need to say to our parents, do you really know on this topic that you're talking about, what's going on in your kids' classrooms? Really important.
Yeah, and I don't know if I really have anything to add to that, but it's only going to get worse, and it's not just going to be an Illinois thing, or where other states this has already been a thing, but it's only going to get worse, and it's really going to force Christians, as you noted, to consider who does the teaching and what is being taught, and more and more, at least within the West. It makes you wonder as Christians, can we be in these settings anymore? We'll just raise those questions, pure and simple. And I don't have a good answer to that. And as you said, maybe it's going to be school board to school board. Thankfully, with where I'm at in the school district I'm at, we still have a lot of pull in terms of pastoral support and all that within our communities, but I can't guarantee that for forever. But you also made a really solid point that the cultural center of communities is no longer the church, by and large. It's typically school. And what happens is a typical family's routine is dictated by what's going on in the school calendar, and then church events come second. So even Wednesday nights, which used to be a very sacred night for church events, is off the table. And of course, Sundays too. How many sports events are going on? Point being, what's really sad and scary that I think that, or the thought hasn't put into it is the fact that our culture will continue to suffer by eliminating churches and churches' roles in education. Because if obviously we don't just do what we do in order to make people moral. That's not the point, but that is a component. And I prefer to live in a society that is shaped and normed by Christian teaching than not. So.
Thank you so much to our presenter for the evening, Pastor Johnson, for your expertise and for your insightful, compassionate words. Thank you to everybody who's been here participating, for the folks who asked questions and engaged in the discussion. Kind of the wrap up, the takeaway point to remember, of course, pornography comes with great danger to relationship, danger to body, danger to soul, danger to people's hearts and lives. Only the gospel ultimately can rescue from those dangers, and the gospel does, and the gospel has. The stories of persons who have been caught in porn addiction, but who have been healed, strengthened by the gospel of Jesus Christ as it comes to us in proclamation, in the sacraments, in the community of God's people. Folks who have been in the porn industry as performers, who have been rescued and now serve as advocates for people who get caught up in that. Those stories are nearly endless. God does not fail to accompany his word with power. And so we can be confident going forward that whether we're speaking to our children, whether we're speaking to our pastors, our local school boards, our elected officials, even our students, that gospel of God's word and God's ways is going to have an effect. So continue to go forward as gospel motivated voices for life. Thank you everybody this evening. And don't forget, there's a link in the chat to sign up for next time's For Life Live on October 19, Isaiah's story. Go with the peace of God and have a great evening.